Kept you waiting, huh? Deepest apologies for constant delays in uploads, and I'll explain more about that in a bit. But there has been one thing I've been meaning to talk about: the subject of censorship along with its relationship with freedom of speech. Recently, this topic has been a source of debate and ire. At any rate, I thought I would give my own take on the arguments involved. Before I do so, I want to express my biases immediately. My own background stems from more of a libertarian stance. As such, my own preconceived notions and how I organize cited material may reflect this. Regardless, I'll do my best to hear the other side of the argument, which can be characterized with speech in relationship to possible future crime. For a tweet that captures the spirit of that argument, we head to the statement. For the sake of fairness, I'll leave the authors anonymous. Context behind the tweet was written at the wake of the tragic Christchurch shootings, which reads, "I feel so sad. We begged you to stop amplifying and normalizing hatred and racism, but you told us that we are politically correct, and freedom of speech was more important. The more you gave the far right a platform, the more powerful you got. We begged you." Before analyzing this tweet, its context requires special attention. The horrific events surrounding the Christchurch shootings, in which a man opened fire within a mosque in New Zealand. It is without question that the shooter is beyond redeemable, and his actions surrounding the event are rightfully condemned. And if we are to cite several experts on terror, for instance Caleb Carr, Gerard Shyland, Arnaud Blin, and Gerald M. Post, who admittedly have alternate definitions on terrorism, but come to a commonality: that terrorism has a tendency of specifically targeting civilians, leaves behind a psychological impact greater than the physical, to gain a political, ideological, or religious goal. And from the Christchurch shooter's own manifesto, stated that I chose firearms for the effect it would have on social discourse, the extra media coverage they would provide, and the effect it could have on the politics of the United States and thereby the political situation of the world. The shooter also went further in his manifesto, expressing he had a political and ideological motivation behind his actions. And according to past material we cited regarding terrorism, then yes, the Christchurch shootings was indeed an act of terror. To utilize violence to leave behind a psychological impact to gain a political goal, and that the shooter wished for the political landscape to further polarize. Which brings us to our next point. After the wake of the terrorist attack, the New Zealand Attorney General vowed to ban semi-automatic rifles. Now I won't get into whether or not there should be more gun restrictions. What I am more concerned with is this: that one man, by one act of terrorism, was able to influence government policy that quickly. And the reason why I find that so disturbing is this: who is to say another individual will do the same, to utilize acts of terror to further add to political polarization? However, I think we've gone off track here, and back to the subject of freedom of speech. There are many arguments that if certain demographics of political content creators were not a thing, then the shooting would not have taken place. What I mean exactly can be best exemplified in one of Dave Rubin's university lectures. I believe it was during his visit to the University of New Hampshire, in which a student asked him, "Does speech lead to violence?"
Do you believe that people who say they hate Jews will not be likely to want to attack Jews? Yes or no question. You're a Jewish man. I'm really shocked.
As far as the mind goes at the moment, there are two ways to answer that question. The first deals with empiricism, that let's say you organize a hypothesis that in the comparison of nation states, those with higher speech restrictions or near equivalence may experience greater frequency of violent crime, and as a result you would test that hypothesis. Speaking of which, such a study has taken place. Within the University of Copenhagen, both Rasmus Fonsbæk Andersen and Jacob Makongama have delivered a fascinating paper. Of course, I'll provide a link to it in the description. Essentially, this Danish study looked at countries controlled for levels of freedom of speech or a close equivalent. It also recorded levels of violent crime. Within each country, they found that there is a negative relationship. If there are higher levels of freedom of speech, there tend to be lower levels of violent crime, and vice versa. But before concluding things here, I do have several critiques on the paper. That this inverse relationship between freedom of speech and violent crime tends to be more true when it comes to liberal democracies rather than authoritarian states. Which brings to mind a past study I cited, named In Poverty, Political Freedom and the Roots of Terrorism by Alberto Abadi, professor of economics at MIT. In his paper, he also found an inverse relationship, however, it dealt with political rights and levels of terrorism. He found that countries which held lower levels of political rights are linked to higher levels of terrorism and vice versa. However, he also found that countries with an intermediate range of political rights experience a greater risk of terrorism than countries that host low or high levels of political rights. Abadi explains this finding that nation-states which display an intermediate level of political freedoms are often seen during times of political transition, when the political zeitgeist appears to be at a crossroads, thus playing a part in the incitement of political instability. For a deeper analysis on the subject, would recommend checking out the Cycles of Terror video. So in summary, according to the Danish study, there seems to be a negative relationship between freedom of speech and levels of violent crime. However, this tends to hold more sway to liberal democracies. However, during times of tumultuous political discourse or during times of political transition, countries may experience higher levels of political instability, which may be seen as a no-brainer. In the case of giving a second possible answer to the question of, does speech lead to violence? Let's tackle the subject of violent crime in relation to this. To cite past material once more, dealing with the case of political instability, such as the IRA, Montoneros, or the Zealots. The first of which began as a fringe movement that the majority of the population did not share in their views. But all that changed during the Easter Rising, when public opinion blasted against the British. In the case of Montoneros, what was once again a fringe guerrilla outfit within the outskirts of Argentina, led to the over-militarization and later junta of the country. And lastly, the Zealots, who in Judea were seen as radicals. But as the Romans became ever more encroaching, the public perspective on the Zealots altered. In other words, within a population set, statistically speaking, there will always be those who wish to take things to a violent level. Not to say we should lay down and accept it, but to understand the relationship to this topic, that those exist who bear fringe beliefs or radical political opinions. For example, committing a genocide or bringing about a utopia via violent means. That those exist who bear such rhetoric, that those exist who wish to abuse the freedoms they were given, whether it be freedom of speech, or any other freedoms that let's say liberal democracies have a tendency to give. That most people lead normal lives and don't necessarily engage in politics that often. That it isn't so much that speech leads to violence, rather than those who already abuse the system are more inclined to break them. That those who already have an inclination to unprovoked violence will also have the inclination to follow through. Which brings to mind another perspective on this topic. Jacob McHangama, in an article, made a fascinating statement. Moreover, our findings is one of probability, rather than iron laws that hold true across the board in every country at all times. As I wrote in my essay, this is not to say that speech will never lead to instances of violence or conflict, only that overall we should expect political and religious violence to increase rather than decrease when liberal democracies fight extremism with censorship. But granted, I am missing something else here. When it comes to political motivations such as this, seldom do people speak without another listening. When concerning terrorism, and this holds true today as in during the days of old, that those who commit acts of political violence wish for their actions to go viral, in which they want to make a statement. And this holds true for Montoneros, the IRA, and the Zealots. That there are a subset of individuals who hold radical beliefs. They feel as though it is them against the entire world. As such, they wish for their actions to go viral, citing the Christchurch shooter and the fact that he referenced PewDiePie along with Candace Owens. It is likely he wants attention. He wants his actions to go viral. And this frames a grim picture for the political landscape, I'm afraid. That those who wish to voice their political grievances through violence have a clear-shot way of gaining media attention. Perhaps I am looking at things at too bleak of a light. I hope I am. At any rate, this is my take on the topic. I must reiterate, however, that this take was not meant to end any sort of debate, but rather add another layer to it. If you feel as though I am wrong or my methods are flawed, feel free to add your thoughts in the comments below. In the end, your insight will benefit us all. And for the sake of fairness, my personal critique on my own take is that I only reference 2 research papers, which may open the door for selection bias along with my own preconceived notions on the matter. Additionally, this is more of an unscripted video. I do have notes in front of me to keep me focused, but unlike past vids, this wasn't a full-on comprehensive analysis. But if you find what I'm saying interesting, then perhaps I'll make a follow-up to this vid. Special shoutouts go to Phronemophobia, Resistor, Averith Prison Island Head, and Sabertooth59385. Thank you so much for donating, it really means the world to me. And if I can make an update here. Again, deepest apologies for the ridiculous wait between uploads. I was bogged down with not only animating this vid, but also had other animating gigs to deal with and personal stuff on the side. But it should be smooth sailing now. I know I keep saying that, but I don't need to animate nearly as much for future uploads. Here's to actually uploading consistently. For those new who are watching, I am Night Owl, and I believe we can discuss both political and economic phenomena in a way that can benefit us both. If you like what you see, donating as little as $1 over in Patreon will go a long way. Regardless of what happens though, have a wonderful rest of the day or night. And take care. I have something special in mind for the next upload, so see you then.